Hello friends, it's a delight to be back in front of you all once again, and I hope you're pretty serious in terms of a preparation for the SBI JA mains exams as well. So what we have in store for you today is something similar to what we did in the previous session as well, wherein I looked at covering 40 important questions. The only difference is that you get 10 additional questions from the exam perspective for the SBI JA mains exam today. So those of you who have not watched that session that was there specifically for your RRB officer mains exam, I would definitely recommend that you should watch that video as well, because it has some 40 interesting questions that could be equally relevant from an SBI JA perspective as well. So cover those 40 and then look forward to covering the 50 questions that are in store for you today. As I said last time as well, it's not just about the questions, it's also about the options that are given in the questions, because you can derive a lot of additional questions from the options or the answers or the multiple MCQs that are given in every question. So each option could also hold another question in itself. So what we'll do is that once I've shown you the questions, I'll again run through the analysis of that particular entire set of 50 questions. And then we will look at analyzing those 50 questions from the perspective of the options as well, as to what additional information can you gather from those options, right? So that is what is in store for today. And I wish you guys all the best, and let's just dive in. Right, so before we get into it, a few basic ground rules and some basic instructions itself. So it's going to be 50 questions, 50 marks, and you guys are aware that it's going to be 1/4 negative marking as well, and for every incorrect answer. The other thing is time allotted is 35 minutes. You can decide to utilize the time as effectively as you would want. And then the most important thing that I want to highlight, not just for this particular mock session that we're having now, but even from the perspective of the exam that you're taking on that D-Day, it's not an ego battle with a question that you need to win. Understand that very clearly. Even if that particular question wins, it's absolutely fine. Move on to the next question. There are going to be enough questions for you to beat, right? So don't get into an ego battle with a question. If you don't know, just move on, right? And if you want to take a calculated risk, that's also fine. But the point is, be mentally prepared that you are taking a calculated risk. Right? If you want to attempt a question, just be mentally prepared that you're getting into it with that kind of a risk framework as well. So that's very, very important when you're looking to attempt a particular question. Next thing, obviously there are other questions to ace. As I said, don't waste your time on not knowing a question and unnecessarily wasting time in double guessing it. Doesn't work, especially in the context of general awareness and also banking and financial awareness. If you know it, you know it. If you don't know it, just move on. Right? It's not like any of the other subjects wherein you can try to figure out something from there. So that's not going to work. So there are other questions to ace. So just get on with it. And the most important thing, as I always keep saying, is time is precious, not just in life, but also in the context of this particular exam. So give it your absolute best shot. Right. So before we move in, again, quickly summarizing, 2 questions will appear in front of your screen. Up to you whether you want to pause the video there and then attend those 2 questions and move on to the next 2, or you can look at consolidating all the questions together and attempt that as a proper test. So obviously one thing which you have to be true to yourself is that when you're seeing a particular question, and if you plan to attempt all of them together, then ensure that you don't read it at that point of time, because then the test loses its relevance, right? So what you should do is collect all those questions together without actually looking at the question and then attempt them together. So that's entirely your call. What you need right now at this stage is to focus on looking at these questions as not just ways to score, but also to improve your knowledge, right? So that's very important from these questions standpoint. Look at it obviously as a test, of course, because that's the way I'm teaching it, but also carefully look at the analysis, because that's going to give you a lot of important insights about the other options that are given in each question as well, right? So without further ado, what I'll do is I'll move myself away from the screen and we will basically quickly look at the questions. So this is question 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, 7 and 8, 9 and 10, 11 and 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45, 46, 47, 48, and topping it up with 49 and 50. So hope you enjoyed the test. Let's now quickly get into the analysis mode to try and figure out what can we learn out of this test. Okay, so the first one, the Financial Times publication called The Banker at its Innovation in Digital Banking Awards 2021 has basically honored which of these banks as the global and Asia Pacific winner for the most innovative in digital banking. So the answer to this one is your DBS Bank. It's basically having its headquarters in Singapore, and the winners of the award were also announced by the editor of The Banker, which is Mr. Joy McKnight, and DBS has also won the award under the cyber security category. Right, so that's again another category where it won for its secure access and remote working solution. So DBS has been doing quite a lot of good work over the last a few years, and it's kind of a testimony to that it has won the best bank award in several categories. So next up, we're talking about Hdfc Life, which is nothing but Hdfc Life Insurance, which released its latest Life Freedom Index, also known as LFI, for the year 2021, and it basically looks at analyzing the financial freedom of the consumers across several segments. Now the question is, which of the following is not one of those segments in its Life Freedom Index? Right, so obviously the first thing is that it talks about proud parents. It's definitely one of the segments. Women empowerment as such is not one of them. It basically is called as smart women. That's the second segment that you're looking at. Wisdom investors is definitely there. Young aspirants is definitely there. So covering basically the segment of the population from the perspective of the 20 plus, or let's say even 30 plus. Then young aspirants from the perspective of 18 plus and in that range. And then wisdom investors obviously is a 30 plus kind of category. And you look at people who are there from that standpoint, and not women empowerment, but smart women. That is the context, and that's the answer in this case. So this is the incorrect one here. So these are the two answers to questions 1 and 2. Now, specifically speaking, when I look at a comparison in terms of where the LFI 2021 number stands vis-a-vis where it was in 2019, then basically you find that it has basically gone down by 4.8 points, and this can primarily be attributed to COVID, right? The consumer confidence was also reduced after the second wave of COVID that happened. If you look at the context of nuclear families, they've definitely been the most impacted in this index. Also, it's very clearly evident, wherein their the LFI dropped by almost 10.5 points, right? Whereas the joint families have been relatively stable in that sense because there was more support available in the family. Now, talking about another aspect in this report, which says is your financial awareness. Right. So from that perspective, it shows that there has been a significant increase during the last two waves of COVID-19, and even familiarity with things like your term insurance has actually gone up significantly because people wanted to insure their lives, and that basically has also increased in terms of financial awareness. The increase is 11 points overall. So the answer to these questions are specifically these, but LFI itself has gone down in India primarily because of COVID-19, but the financial awareness has actually gone up. Right, so these are the answers to the specific questions that we were looking at. Now moving on to questions 3 and 4. Which insurance company has become the first insurance company to basically partner with NPCI and has integrated NPCI's UPI auto pay platform into its system in order to enable its customers to make instant automated recurring premium payments of various insurance policies? So that's the question that is there in front of you. Now, obviously, these are the various options that are there. So the answer to the specific one is it's ICICI Prudential Life that has gone ahead and done this, becomes the first insurance company which is basically integrated with the NPCI's UPI auto pay platform, right, into its system for enabling its customers to pay for various insurance policies in terms of premiums. Now, next question is, which leading digital lender basically launched its first limitless credit line backed prepaid card in partnership with Dash? So there are two questions here. One is, which is the leading digital lender, and secondly, which is the banking partner here. And basically the third entity in this is the RuPay as the payment network, right? And what is it trying to offer? It's trying to offer something called as BNPL, which is your buy now pay later concept, right? And enabling its customers to convert their outstandings into easy, equated or equal monthly installments. Right, so the entity here that we're looking at specifically is when you talk about limitless credit line backed prepaid cards. The answer in this case for one happens to be the company LoanTap, which is doing a phenomenal job in terms of providing a lot of basic facilities from this perspective from a digital standpoint, right? And then the partnership is with the SBM Bank. So these two entities have come together and provided this solution. So the answers in this case is ICICI Prudential and LoanTap and SBM, right? So next, moving on to questions 5 and 6. Which is the first bank in India to basically achieve the feat of issuing 1 crore FASTags, thereby cornering almost 28% of the share of the market as a FASTag issuer bank? So the answer to this one is PPBL, which is your Paytm Payments Bank Limited. Now, if you also look at the data that has been provided by the NPCI, you have approximately 3.47 crore FASTags that have basically been issued as of June 2021. Now, PPBL also exists as India's largest acquirer of toll plazas also. So that's another bit of data for you guys. And this is under the NETC, which is your National Electronic Toll Collection as well. So PPBL in its own data has stated that out of the 851 toll plazas across the national and state highways, 280 of them are actually using the PPBL payment gateway to collect toll charges digitally. So that's again a phenomenal number. So it's actually played a critical role in the digital integration in terms of transportation, right? That's very important. Next up, we talk about which tech-based lending platform has partnered with Facebook India to launch its first of its kind small business loan program in order to provide loans worth rupees 5 lakh to rupees 50 lakh for your small businesses that are advertising on Facebook's platforms, right? So the answer in this case happens to be Indify, which has done a phenomenal job from that perspective. So again, tying up with Facebook for your small business loan programs. So these are the two answers in this case. So Paytm Payments Bank Limited and Indify, these are the two answers. Moving on to questions 7 and 8. So a leading insurance provider has basically partnered with a leading payment gateway solution provider as well for safe and secure e-mandate process on the premium payment in terms of procedures that are there, thereby becoming the first life insurer to provide the e-mandate facility to its customers. So the question is naming the two entities, which is the leading insurance provider and which is the leading payment gateway. So the answer in this case happens to be Max Life and BuildX that have come together in terms of providing this solution by basically looking at providing a secure e-mandate process for premium payment. So these two entities have come together. So you can call it as MB, which is Max Life and BuildX. Next question basically talks about again the Asian Development Bank, which is continuing to do a lot of phenomenal work with India. So in this case, it is expected to provide a $500 million loan to the government of India to expand the metro rail network. And this is with the construction of 2 new metro lines totaling 56 kilometers in which city? So the question is which city? So the one where the maximum amount of work right now is going on from the perspective of metro construction, this is made purely from a common sense standpoint, is Bangalore, and that happens to be the correct answer in this case. So the 2 new metro lines totaling 56 kilometers are basically towards the outer ring road, which is in the context of the Kempegowda International Airport corridor, and this will basically have around 30 stations, right? Additional, another $2 million assistance is also being provided by the ADB, which is to help Karnataka government formulate the urban development projects. So that is something additional that ADB is providing to the Karnataka government. Now the grant will be utilized by BMRCL, which is your Bengaluru or Bangalore Metro Rail Corporation Limited, right? So that's the entity that is going to basically use the funding being provided by ADB, right? So that's the context overall. Now, who were the signatories to this? This is basically Mr. Rajat Kumar Mishra, who's basically the Additional Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, and Takio Kunishi, who happens to be the Country Director of ADB's Indian Resident Mission. So that's the context as far as question 7 and 8 are concerned. So these are the answers: Max Life and BuildX, and then Bengaluru is the where construction of metros is happening through the funding received from ADB. Right. Now looking at questions 9 and 10. This small finance bank recently launched a fintech accelerator program called Dash for the startup entrepreneurs ecosystem in order to provide legal and regulatory support for the various startups through its experts and also through providing contacts through venture capitalists as well. So which of these is the small finance bank and which is the fintech accelerator program that we're talking about? So if you look at common sense, the one that kind of fits the bill perfectly is Equitas SFB and Equitech. That the name of the fintech accelerator makes a lot more sense in that context, and that indeed is the correct answer in this case. wherein the fintech accelerator is Equitech and the small finance bank is Equitas Bank. Right, next up, which small finance bank unveiled its first integrated marketing communication campaign? So when I say integrated, it means that it is across all media, right? So when I say all media, you're talking about print media, you're talking about social media, yeah, or the digital media, so to speak, right? And within the digital context also, it is split between television, your radio, you're talking about the internet, everywhere, right? So it's an integrated marketing communication campaign. That's what it means. And it's basically called Badlav Humse Hai. And it basically has Amir Khan and Kiara Advani as its brand ambassadors, who are trying to showcase its passion for innovation and representing it as a change maker in the Indian banking sector. So that is the first integrated marketing communication campaign launched by this small finance bank. And the answer is basically your AU Small Finance Bank. That's the one which is doing this. Now, it also launched its digital banking platform, which is basically called as your AU 0101, which is a full suite of banking services for its customers, which includes face-to-face interactions as well with a banker over a video call. So that is what AU SFB is doing. So phenomenal work in the context of bringing in integration towards the customer as well. So that is on the lines of questions 9 and 10, Equitas, SFB and Equitech, and integrated marketing communication campaign Badlav Humse Hai with Amir Khan and Kiara Advani is AU SFB. Let's move on to the next set of questions, 11 and 12. So 11 basically talks about this financial entity recently introduced an FD, which is basically your green and sustainable deposits, and whatever deposits it's able to collect from customers from this standpoint will be directed towards the financing of green and sustainable housing credit solutions and services towards the safeguarding of the environment from climate change. So the answer in this case is fairly straightforward. I'm talking about this financial entity, so it does not necessarily have to be the bank. And the answer in this case happens to be HDFC Limited, which is kind of providing this deposit from a green and sustainable standpoint. Next up, the next question that essentially comes in is what is the basic features or the benefits of this particular deposit? So this deposit can be there from a period of 36 to 120 months, and it is applicable both for your residents as well as your NRIs. And the rate of interest can go up to 6.55%. Of course, there'll be additional benefits if you're a senior citizen above 60 years. Then you'll get an additional 0.25% per annum on the deposits up to rupees 2 crore. And then there's an additional ROI of 0.1% per annum, which will be provided for deposits up to rupees 50 lakh per calendar month per customer if it is placed or renewed through the online platform. So if that happens, the entity is additionally providing this incentive of 0.1% per annum in case you use its digital platform as well. So that is basically HDFC Limited. Next up, we're talking about which B2B digital marketplace service provider has basically launched a new credit program to help your Kirana stores and your retailers in managing the working capital requirements and promoting their businesses. So the answer in this case happens to be Flipkart Wholesale. Wholesale because I'm trying to attract customers from a business to business standpoint. So Flipkart Wholesale is the entity that is taking care of that. Now Flipkart Retail, while the word retailers is present here, is a little bit confusing, but that's not the answer, because Flipkart Retail does not have a name called Flipkart Retail. It is just called Flipkart, and it is from a B2C perspective, right? So business to consumer is what Flipkart is doing. Now when you talk about the Flipkart group as a whole, right, so from that perspective, there are several subsidiaries that this has, or several entities that are part of this. So first one, of course, is Flipkart Wholesale. Then of course you have the flagship entity Flipkart itself. Then you have Myntra, which is another acquisition. Then you have PhonePe from a fintech perspective, and the recent acquisition ClearTrip also falls in this scheme of things. But of course, it's not called Flipkart Retail, it's just called Flipkart. And the answer, of course, in this case, because we are specifically talking about business to business, is Flipkart Wholesale and not C. So these are the answers in this case. So HDFC Limited and Flipkart Wholesale are the two answers that we're looking at. Now quickly moving on to the next set of questions. Which bank has basically signed a memorandum of understanding with the government of Andhra Pradesh in order to assist and finance over 14,000 beneficiaries to set up Aqua units under AP government's Fish Andhra scheme? So it's fairly understandable. So when I'm talking about anything around fish, it has to be under the PMMSY, which is the Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana, right? So the answer in this case happens to be Bank of Baroda. That's the entity which is actually working together with the government of Andhra Pradesh in order to basically set up Aqua units in the Fish Andhra scheme. Okay, now the next question is, which bank and IIM have basically come together and signed a memorandum of understanding to provide funding for identified startups under the said bank's Springboard scheme, right? And the MOU has been specifically signed with NSRCEL, which is the NS Raghavan Center for Entrepreneurial Learning, which is the Entrepreneurship Center of Excellence at this particular IIM. So while you may have come across one of these things somewhere, so that is the way to interrelate the news. So one of them is that the NSR cell is basically the Entrepreneurship Center of Excellence at IIM Bangalore. So you could have found out the answer that way. Or the other way is Indian Bank had basically launched something called as the India or IND Springboard. So this is basically a program that was launched by Indian Bank. So you could have either correlated it through Indian Bank or through IIM Bangalore, and you could have figured out this answer. And both of these have basically come together. The MOU is basically signed by P. Chunduru or Padmaja Chunduru, who happens to be the MD and CEO of Indian Bank at that point in time, and Professor Rishikesh T. Krishnan or RT Krishnan, who basically is the director of IIM Bangalore, and K.S. Sudhakar Rao, who was also present there, and that's basically the general manager MSME of your Indian Bank, right? So the entity or the person is basically K.S. Sudhakar Rao as well, right? So he is basically the general manager for MSMEs. Now, just to go back a bit in terms of context, in October 2020, your Indian Bank basically launched this, right? So when was this actually launched? It was launched in October 2020, and that was in collaboration with Indian Institute of Technology Madras, right? And the incubation cell of IIT Madras, which is IIT Madras Incubation Cell. And this was to provide a credit facility of rupees 50 crore to the startups for their working capital requirements. So it started off in October 2020, the Indian Bank Springboard, and then it was continued from not just with IIT Madras, but now it has been kind of signed with your IIM Bangalore as well, right? So that's the update as far as these two questions are concerned. So the answers are Bank of Baroda and basically Indian Bank and IIM Bangalore. Moving up to the next set of questions. Now, ADB has basically partnered with which housing financier to reduce the carbon emissions and preserve water and vitality in India? So that is the question here. Now, talking about it from this perspective, this one happens to be IIFL in the context of IIFL Home Finance, right? So there are a lot of other players as well, but IIFL is the one where ADB has partnered in terms of this particular facility. The total cost of the project is $1 million, right? And ADB will fund it through what it calls as the UCCR, which is the Urban Climate Change Resilience Trust Fund, okay? And IIFL will basically contribute 0.15 million out of this, right? In terms of dollars, of course. This will come through IIFL, and this is towards your inexpensive housing in India. So that is the context. So the tie-up is between ADB and India Infoline Home Finance. Right. Next up, we're talking about which bank signed a memorandum of understanding with the Indian Navy to offer a special defense savings account, basically called as Honor First, right? And this is for the serving personnel and veteran of the Indian Navy. So the context is fairly simple. Whenever I have first written, the first answer should ideally be in the context of branding, right? So which brand or which bank has the brand or the name first associated with it? So IDFC First Bank is the name. So automatically a bit of common sense should have helped you answer this question. So IDFC First is the bank which has launched the Honor First account for serving personnel and veterans of the Indian Navy by offering them special defense savings account. So the answers in this case happen to be India Infoline Home Finance and IDFC First Bank, right? Now, if you're looking at additional information, the MOU was again signed at New Delhi between Commodore Neeraj Malhotra and Commodore Pay and Allowances Indian Navy and senior officials of the IDFC First Bank. So this is basically going to be a zero balance salary account, and it basically can allow you to earn 5% interest per annum. And it also has additional insurance coverage that is being provided, wherein you have a 40 lakh insurance coverage for personal accident with another 4 lakhs for your child education grant and another 2 lakhs for your girl child marriage. And if you are involved in any kind of an air accident, then you're again covered up to 1 crore. So again, a holistic offering by IDFC First Bank towards the defense personnel in the country, titled honor first. Right, so moving on to the next set of questions now, 17 and 18. As per the Hurun Global Rich List 2021, which country is currently the billionaire capital of the world? So obviously you're aware of the rich list that is there, and Mukesh Ambani happens to be the only name from an India standpoint in the top 10. And of course, the leader right now is Elon Musk, followed by Jeff Bezos as well. Specifically, when I talk about this, the answer happens to be any country which is doing phenomenally well right now from that perspective is China. Right, so the numbers, when you look at it, China is there, you have US, and then you have India as the top 3 countries doing in terms of billionaires. The answer for this one, billionaire capital of the world, currently is Beijing. Right, that's the answer. So China has pulled away big time in terms of the number of billionaires in the past year, adding 259 to the 1058 in order to become the first country in the world to basically top 1,000 known dollar billionaires in the world. And the USA is in the second spot with basically 696 billionaires that are there. Right now, why am I highlighting all of this information? Because I'm just trying to, there's no need for highlighting a lot of this information, but this is just to motivate you guys that there are a lot of billionaires in the world, and if you're watching this video, maybe this video can inspire you to become a billionaire as well. Right, so these are the basically the big 2, China and the US, who are doing phenomenally well in this perspective, right? And they basically bring together 54% of the known billionaires on this planet. Now, India has also done phenomenally well, wherein it added 40 billionaires to the list to kind of move into the 3rd place on the list overall. And this is obviously followed by Germany, UK, and Switzerland. And each of them basically have more than 100 known billionaires. Now, Beijing is the billionaire capital of the world. It has 145 billionaires overall living there. Shanghai overtook New York to become the 2nd in this list, right? And this basically has 113 billionaires, right? And Shenzhen, another city, basically added 30 billionaires to kind of overtake its neighbor Hong Kong. And London is basically also there. Now, 6 of the top 10 cities with the most billionaires are basically in China. So look at how China has definitely performed, but good work for India. We basically garnered another 40 added to our list of billionaires as well. Next up, we're talking about Karnataka Vikas Gramin Bank has partnered with the Karnataka government to launch the Dash portal to store the farmers' land details. Now, which is the portal that it has launched? The name of the portal is basically called Fruits, and that's the answer to this question, right? So the first one is basically Beijing, and the second one basically is Fruits, which basically refers to your farmer registration and unified beneficiary information system. So that's what it basically is called, right? And there are other things also there in this list. Now, the perspective of adding top here is basically, it talks about the Operation Greens, right? Which was again an initiative of the government, and especially in the context of COVID, wherein you basically had this coming in, wherein you said that the main focus crops were tomato, onion, and potato, and then Operation Greens was eventually extended from top to total, wherein you brought in all the other fruits and vegetables as well. So that is the context. Now, technically, Vikas and Gramin are parts of the name itself, so it does not fit the bill in this case. So the answer happens to be Fruits. That's the answer to what KVGB has done as a portal while partnering with the Karnataka government. So for additional information, we basically can understand that the portal was launched by a gentleman named Neeraj Kumar Verma, who happens to be the Chief General Manager of NABARD. Now, also in the context of the Operation Greens, the Ministry of Food Processing Industries, which is also known as MOFP, basically extended the Operation Greens from top to all the fruits and vegetables, which is total for a period of 6 months on a pilot basis, and that was basically part of the ABA or the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. So that's the context in terms of questions 17 and 18. Let's quickly move on to the next set of questions. Now, the fintech startup Capital Float Financial Services Private Limited has partnered with which entity to extend its BNPL, which is again buy now pay later solution, to Dash, to all Dash enabled online merchants. So basically the number one is repeating in both places. So just to understand this, you can basically put in one of these options and just see. So has partnered with BillDesk to provide the solution Hazelnut 786 to BillDesk enabled online merchants. So now that the options are clear and what exactly is expected out of the question, let's try and look at the answer. So the answer in this case happens to be Razorpay, and it is basically called as Walnut 369. So Walnut happens to be one of the companies as well, so which is where the name is correlatable, and that's where the answer becomes this. And all the other obviously are your vendors from a payment solution provider standpoint, but the answers here are very imaginative, so these are definitely not the options that we're looking for. The answer in this case happens to be Razorpay and Walnut 369. Next question that basically comes up is, which of these banks has not bought a 5.55% stake in the fintech platform IBBIC, which is basically your Indian bank's blockchain infrastructure company, and kind of representing 50,000 shares in IBBIC for a cash consideration of INR 5 lakh. So the answer in this case is there were 6 banks which basically had taken up 5.55% stake, right? And ICICI was the one which did not take 5.55. It basically took 5.44, representing 49,000 shares, right? So when I talk about IBBIC, what exactly is this? So you're talking about blockchain infrastructure company. It basically is a platform that is offering DLT solutions. What is DLT? Distributed ledger technology, right? And it's also known as blockchain technology in layman terms, to the Indian financial services sector. The equity ownership of IBBIC is basically aimed at providing DLT solutions for the entire financial services sector. Now, it was basically set up by 18 banks in India, right? And the new company will basically use your blockchain technology for processing your inland letters of credit with equal shareholding also. Now, which platform will IBBIC be using? It will basically be using Infosys Finacle Connect. So that's the platform that IBBIC is expected to use to digitize and automate your inter-organization trade finance processes as well, right? So now, which are the entities which have actually taken 5.55%? So that basically is your SBI, Axis, Indian, Yes Bank. All of these have taken a 5.55%, and your ICICI has basically taken a 5.44 share in this, right? So the answers to these questions are your Razorpay, Walnut 369, and ICICI Bank. Moving on to the next set of questions. Now, HDFC Bank has divested a 2.21% stake in Dash for 222.71 crores over the period June to August 2021, which means that the 2.21% stake was let go over a period of time and not in one shot, right? That's the context. Now, anyway, when I look at the options, your NSDL and CDSL are the correct terms. So there is nothing called as CSDL or NDSL. So these options anyway get eliminated. So you're left with these three, and CCIL, of course, is your Clearing Corporation of India Limited. So now, talking about CCIL, the core committee appointed at the behest of Reserve Bank of India for setting up CCIL identified 6 core promoters for CCIL, which was State Bank of India, then you had IDBI Bank, right? Then basically bringing in your ICICI as well. Then you had your LIC and your Bank of Baroda and HDFC. So these were the core promoters that were brought in from a perspective of CCIL. And the answer in this case is not NSDL, but CDSL, which is the Central Depository Services India Limited. That's the company that we're looking at, where the HDFC Bank rather has divested 2.21% stake. Now, talking about the next one, which bank's board of directors has approved to divest its entire stake of 19.18% in the Asset Reconstruction Company India Limited? Now, the answer in this case is fairly straightforward if you're following what is happening in the context of news, wherein IDBI is trying to look at divesting a lot of stakes so that it becomes easier overall. So that from that perspective, IDBI is the one which has basically divested its entire stake in ARCIL, which happens to be an asset reconstruction company. Now, technically, when I talk about ARCIL and its sponsor banks and financial institutions, Avenue India Resurgence is definitely one of the institutions. SBI is also one of the institutions. Then you have IDBI Bank, which is definitely there, or rather it was there prior to this decision by its board. Then ICICI Bank and Punjab National Bank. So all these guys are definitely there as entities who are basically having stake in ARCIL, but IDBI has looked to move out of this entirely, right? So the answer in this case happens to be IDBI. So the answer here in these two questions is CDSL and IDBI Bank. Right. Next up, we're moving on to the next set of questions, talking about Razorpay, which basically is a converged payment solution company in India. It's obviously been on an acquisition spree over the last few years, wherein it bought basically 3 companies, which of them is not a Razorpay acquired company, right? So the answer in this case happens to be Beta FinLabs, because there's nothing called in that sense. So you have Terra FinLabs, which was the 3rd acquisition made by Razorpay. Now, the first acquisition was basically Third Watch. Then that happened in 2018. Then you had Opfin that Razorpay acquired in 2019. So this was the second acquisition. And the third acquisition happens to be TerraFin Labs, which is basically an artificial intelligence based risk analysis platform, and it's basically based out of Bangalore in Karnataka. Right now, the tech stack and risk management capabilities and onboarding solutions of Terra will be used to create a credit line for the merchant network of Razorpay. That's what it plans to do, right? And Razorpay will use this acquisition for one of its entities, which is basically your Razorpay Capital, right? And this is basically the small and medium enterprise based lending company or lending business of Razorpay, right? So to target the SMEs, the Razorpay Capital was created, and this will be the business unit of Razorpay, which will be using the TerraFin Labs acquisition, right? So as to integrate artificial intelligence and risk management also in order to create a credit line for the merchant network of Razorpay. So the answer in this case happens to be beta. That's the answer here, right? Looking at the next question, we're basically saying that the International Finance Corporation, IFC, which is the investment arm of the World Bank, and its two investment funds, which is your IFC FIG, which is your Financial Institutions Growth, and IFC Emerging Asia Funds, EF, they've basically acquired a 4.99% stake worth 916 crore in which of the following banks. So this was basically in Federal Bank. So Federal Bank has basically decided to raise capital by giving a 4.99% stake to IFC and two of its funds. So that's the answer in this case. So moving on, the answers are Beta FinLabs and Federal Bank in this particular case. Moving on to the next set of questions. So question 25 talks about which of the following banks or bank have basically recently been empaneled by the RBI as agency banks in order to facilitate transactions related to the government businesses. So the question here is that in Feb 2021, what RBI did was it removed the ban which it had imposed way back in 2012 over the appointment of scheduled private sector banks, right, as agency banks of RBI. So there was a ban imposed in 2012 for appointing scheduled private sector banks as agency banks of RBI. And it has now gone on to revise those guidelines and authorized your scheduled private sector banks as agency banks for RBI to conduct various kinds of government businesses, right? So that is the context. So agency bank would basically act as an intermediary for various kinds of tax payments and various other things as well, right? So that is the context of the agency bank. So here, IndusInd, Karnataka, South Indian Bank, all three of them were recently appointed or rather given approval as agency banks for RBI to facilitate transactions related to the government businesses. So the answer in this case happens to be all of A, B, and C. The next one, which of the following entities has recently received an NBFC license from the Reserve Bank of India and basically plans to disburse 650 crore worth of education loans in FY 2022. So the answer in this case happens to be Gyandhan. But all these entities are very interesting to learn and understand. So let's quickly look at each one of them. So talking about Eduvance, it was basically founded in 2016, right? And it was founded by basically Varun Chopra, who happens to be an IIT Madras alumnus, and basically you had Rahil Shah, who is basically an IIM Ahmedabad alumni. And together, basically Eduvance has disbursed loans worth 300 crores to over 20,000 learners across 350 plus institutes. Now talking about Credence, now this was established in 2017, okay, and this was by Avinash Kumar, right? And then you had Mayank Bhateja. These were the two guys who basically set this up. And this again is Delhi based, and it's a financial aid office for over 200 management colleges across 17 cities in India, and it has approved loans worth over 100 crores, and it is servicing 200 plus loan requests on a daily basis, right? That's phenomenal again. Now talking about your next one, which is your Leap Finance, which was founded by your IIT Kharagpur alumni. So talking about Vaibhav Singh and Arnav Kumar. So these were the guys who got together, and they've basically found Leap Finance, which offers education loans to your Indian students when you're looking for a global career, right? So its credit underwriting engine takes into account several alternatives and derived data points to determine the future income potential of loan applicants. So that's again something phenomenal. And then again in 2017, there was an entity called as Propelled, which was founded by ex-bankers and consultants So Bibhu Prasad was one of these guys, and again you had Victor Senapati, who was the second person involved here, right? And Brijesh Samantre. So these were the three guys who were involved, who basically brought in Propelled, and it basically goes beyond your CIBIL scores and your present day credit worthiness to evaluate students based again on your future income earning potential. So that's something that has been going on. Now Gyandhan was basically founded in again 2016. So this was again by IIT alumni, which is basically your Ankit Mehra and Janesh Sinha. So these are the guys who basically came together and founded this entity as an educational financing marketplace for your Indian students pursuing studies abroad. Now this again Delhi-based startup has basically partnered with 300 plus institutes and enables loans. It's already gone beyond 800 crores already through your leading Indian banks. It also offers counseling and various kinds of scholarships. Now, why was I highlighting all of this? Because again, anyone who's doing good from an education standpoint should definitely be lauded and respected. So from that perspective, kudos to all these five entities which are doing great work from an education service provider standpoint, right? So the answer in this case is the one which got the NBFC license is Gyandhan. Right, so the answer to the first one, of course, is all the three of them, which is IndusInd, Karnataka and South Indian Bank, and the answer for the recent NBFC license is your Gyandhan. Okay, moving on to the next set of questions now. We're looking at replacement of actual card details with an alternate code which shall be unique for a combination of several things. One, the card. Second, the requester. And third, the device. Now, when I say requester, it is basically the entity which accepts the request from the customer and passes it on to the card network to issue a correspondent code. So from that perspective, when these three things put together, you're basically replacing card details with an alternate code. That phenomenon is basically known as tokenization. Now, what's the context of demutualization? So demutualization is the process by which a customer-owned mutual organization or a cooperative basically changes legal form to basically become a joint stock company. Right? It is also sometimes called as your stocking or privatization, wherein something which is more like a cooperative society kind of comes together, and instead of becoming mutual, it kind of becomes a corporate. So that is demutualization. That's the context here. Now, talking about securitization, securitization is the process of taking an illiquid asset or a group of assets and through financial engineering transform them into a security, just like it happened in the case of your global financial crisis as well, wherein you saw that a lot of your housing loans that were provided, right? So both your prime loans as well as your subprime loans basically were bundled together and securitized into what is known as your mortgage-backed securities, and another name given to that was your collateralized debt obligations. So all these were basically asset-backed securities, and that process of converting or transforming an illiquid or a group of assets into a security is basically known as a securitization process. Encryption again is the process of converting your data into some form of a code which cannot be easily read or understood without having a key pertaining to it. So that process is basically known as encryption, and the process of deciphering the data of encryption is called as decryption, right? So this is what the other options mean. So the answer in this case happens to be tokenization, right? Next up, the question is that the government of India recently appointed one of these individuals as the new MD of LIC, and he or she has been serving as the executive director, legal department of LIC of India. So the answer in this case happens to be a person called Mini Ipe, who was the first woman zonal manager of LIC, and she basically headed the Hyderabad zone. She has also served as the executive director, international operations, and the director and CEO of LIC Housing Finance Limited also. So again, a great achievement for her. Now, Vipin Anand is the MD who she replaces. So she's going to take over from Vipin Anand. Mukesh Kumar Gupta, Siddharth Mohanty, Rajkumar, all of these guys continue to be MDs at LIC, which basically has 4 MDs and 1 chairman. And the chairman also got recently an extension from the age of 60 to the age of 62. And that chairman of LIC is Mr. M.R. Kumar, because you wanted a good, stable leadership as LIC looks at getting into an IPO mode. That was the idea, right? So Mini Ape is the answer in this case, and the tokenization is the answer to question 27. Let's move on to the next set of questions now. Which of these individuals was roped in by the RBI for its new public awareness campaign against digital banking fraud? So a little bit of common sense tells you that the answer in this case is Neeraj Chopra. Now, talking about two Indian brands, leading Indian brands that basically reached an important milestone in the LIBOR transition. As we are aware that LIBOR is going to be phased out by the end of December 2021. So for this transition, what these two entities did was they got into a $100 million deal in the external commercial borrowing market, and basically they used what is known as SOFR, or the secured overnight financing rate, for a period of 5 years. And SOFR is one of the alternative reference rate that is expected to replace LIBOR. So the answer in this case happens to be your SBI, State Bank of India, and IOCL. Both of the entities got together and basically performed this LIBOR transition through SOFR. So that's the answer in this case. Now, talking about SOFR, it obviously is the new alternative benchmark rate that will be replacing LIBOR. And basically this is going to happen by the end of 2021. Now, looking at some of the other aspects of this question, wherein I want to talk about some of the other brands as well. So Smriti Mandhana is basically the brand ambassador for Equitas SFB. Rajkumar Rao happens to be for Cashify. Then you have Amitabh Bachchan, who obviously endorses a lot of brands, so is the case with Ranveer Singh as well. But IDFC First is something from a financial standpoint that Amitabh Bachchan is endorsing, and then Ranveer Singh basically is looking at Kotak Mahindra Bank. And I'm talking about some of the other ones as well. So when I say Cashify, it is basically a re-commerce marketplace. Right, so you've heard e-commerce. Now, what is this re-commerce? Re-commerce is a platform which is allowing you to resell your old or used electronic gadgets. So that is basically your re-commerce. So Rajkumar Rao is basically a brand ambassador for that. Now, technically, again, from a financial standpoint, SRK or Shah Rukh Khan basically endorses ICICI, Virat Kohli endorses PNB, and then Saina Nehwal basically is looking at Indian Overseas Bank. So these are some of the additional names that I wanted to highlight. Right, so moving on to the next set of questions. Now, the RBI basically approved the reappointment of this gentleman as the MD and CEO of which of the following banks with effect from October 2021 to October 2023. So the answer in this case happens to be ICICI Bank. Then on July 6, 2021, which of these banks basically signed a memorandum of understanding with the Indian Army to offer a defense service salary package called as Power Salute, and that was the name of the initiative, and it was covering all ranks of army officers, be it servicing defense personnel or serving defense personnel, or even the pensioners. So the answer in this case basically happens to be Axis Bank. Right, so let's quickly look at some of the other elements as well. So now talking about the MD and CEO of some of the other leading banks. So PNB right now has Mr. SS Mallikarjuna Rao. Yes Bank has Prashant Kumar. Indian Bank basically has Shantilal Jain, and SBI basically has the chairman as Mr. Dinesh Kumar Khara. So this is the set of questions and the answers respective to them. Moving on to the next set of questions. Now, Axis Bank has also entered into a partnership with this entity and launched an 18-week fintech professional program under its Digital Banking Academy. Right, so it's basically called as Dash Axis Bank Digital Banking Academy, and this is basically trying to build your future ready professionals for Axis Bank, offering an opportunity for graduates who are having 0 to 3 years of experience to directly join Axis Bank as Deputy Manager IT. So which is the entity? We're talking specifically about NIIT IFBI, and we'll discuss that in a bit. Now, talking about the next question, which is on 8th of July 2021, your STPI, or your Software Technology Parks of India, which is part of the MeitY, which is the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, it basically entered into an MOU with 6 different entities in order to promote entrepreneurship and create a nurturing ecosystem so as to create centers of excellence. Now, which of these is not one of those entities? Now, talking about MathWorks, Pontac, BOB, Your Story, all of these are definitely the entities with which STPI actually signed a MOU. Zoho is not one of them, right? So the answer in this case, instead of Zoho, it was Freshworks, and Freshworks, of course, happens to be one of the entities that got recently listed on NASDAQ as well. And again, more than 500 of its employees turned crorepati's basically. Now, that's again a big motivating news for you guys. So that is where, so Freshworks and Yes Bank were the other 2 entities, and the answer in this case is Zoho is not one of those entities which basically tied up with STPI, right? So that's the answer here. Now, next up, basically talking about the answer here, it's NIIT Institute of Finance, Banking and Insurance that is basically tied up with Axis in order to basically boost the Digital Banking Academy of these 2 entities, right? So it's not NIIT alone. NIIT is basically the National Institute of Information Technology, not that, but NIIT IFBI. That's the answer, right? So moving on to the next set of questions now. So July 2021, Loan Tap, which is basically a mobile and web-based platform providing instant personal loans digitally with minimal documentation, has partnered with this particular bank to provide personal loans to your salaried professionals. So the answer in this case happens to be Ujjivan SFB, with whom Loan Tap has basically tied up. Now, next up, we're talking about on which day in 1955, Government of India took control of Imperial Bank of India and renamed it to State Bank of India. And the day is basically celebrated as the foundation day of SBI. And on this very day in 2021, SBI allocated how much to the PM CARES Fund to support the fight against COVID-19. So here, if you go by logic, you might actually get this wrong, because obviously all of you are aware that the day is July 1st. And that is basically celebrated as the foundation day of SBI. But the problem is, if you look at the number of years perspective, so this happens to be the 66th foundation day of SBI. So if you go by logic, you would think that SBI would have probably contributed 66 crore to the PM CARES Fund. Unfortunately, that's not the case. It has contributed 62 crore, right? So this is where, if you go by logic, you would have probably got this answer wrong. The correct answer in this case is July 1st and 62 crores, right? So these are the answers: Ujjivan SFB and July 1st, 62 crores. Now moving on to the next set of questions. The Indian Econometric Society, TIES, which is a trust, has conferred the inaugural Professor C.R. Rao Centenary Gold Medal to which of the following economists, right? So C. Rangarajan, who happens to be an ex-RBI governor, and Jagdish Bhagwati are the two people who actually received this award. Now Kaushik Basu also received an award, but that was something different. That was basically your Humboldt Research Award for Economics in the year 2021. So that's what Mr. Kaushik Basu got. So he's also an awardee, a very famous economist at that, but he was not awarded the C.R. Rao CGM award. So that went to C. Rangarajan and Jagdish Bhagwati. So the answer in this case becomes both B and C. Now, which entity basically launched the Arogyam Healthcare Business Loan for the healthcare sector to extend loan support in view of the novel coronavirus pandemic? So the answer in this case happens to be SBI. So that is the answer here. Now, going back in terms of providing some additional information, when you talk about the Professor C.R. Rao Centenary Gold Medal Award, it is basically an award presented once in every 2 years, right, by TIES to one of the people who are an Indian or an Indian origin scholar for their lifetime contributions to the field of theoretical and applied aspects of quantitative economics and official statistics. Now the award obviously consists of a gold medal and a citation. Now C.R. Rao was basically an Indian American mathematician and statistician, and he received the Padma Vibhushan in the year 2001. So another very famous economist in himself, and this particular award has been named after him, right? So that's the context here. Now moving on to the next set of questions. 12th of July 2021, RBI introduced something called as the RBI Retail Direct to facilitate investments in government securities by your retail investors, and the idea was to democratize the ownership of government securities beyond your banks and beyond your managers of your pooled resources, such as let's say mutual funds. Now retail investors are basically enabled to open and maintain their securities account, which is basically called as what? That's the question. So that account is basically called as the RDG account or the Retail Direct Gilt account, right? And it was fairly evident from the options itself that this will be the answer, because it is provided in the brackets itself. I wanted to make it a little bit easier for you guys. Ideally, when you look at the exam, you may not get this full form being available there itself, right? So it is the RDG account that you should remember. Just to make it a little easier for you, I directly mentioned Retail Direct Gilt here so that you're able to answer this question. Right now, one of the questions that comes in is, what are the kind of securities that are allowed in this, right? So basically, you can look at the Government of India Treasury bills. Then you can look at the Government of India dated securities. You can also look at your sovereign gold bonds, and you can also look at your state development loans, whatever the states are issuing in the form of government securities. So all these are eligible securities that can actually be bought or basically maintained in the security account for your retail investors. So gilt is nothing. So this is not in the context of finance. So definitely it's not a gilt account. It is basically the gilt account. That is the correct terminology, right? So in the context of the RBI, it also provides something called as an SGL, which is nothing but your subsidiary general ledger. So let me write it down for you guys. It's basically subsidiary general ledger account. Now, what is this account about? Now, this is SGL account is kind of a facility to select entities who can basically maintain their securities. So whatever securities we talked about right now, so these entities can maintain their securities in these SGL accounts, which will be maintained by the public debt offices or the PDOs of the Reserve Bank of India, right? And this basically facilitates the trading of government securities on the stock exchanges. So that is what the SGL account is for. Now there is another context here. There is something called as a CSGL account as well. So that is basically a constituent subsidiary general ledger account. Now this is a service provided by the RBI through the primary dealers that are there and banks to those entities who are not allowed to directly hold SGL accounts. So those of entities which are not allowed to directly hold SGL accounts can basically hold a CSGL account with a bank or a primary dealer, right? And that bank or a primary dealer, of course, the precondition is that they themselves should have a SGL account, right? And using that, they are basically allowed to participate in the trading of government securities as well, right? So technically individuals are also allowed to hold the constituent SGL account. So now talking about the overdraft or the OD account, this account basically talks about whenever a corporate or let's say an entity wants to basically overdraw an account, right? So you have, let's say, a current account, right? And let's say a bank may have sanctioned you a 10 crore kind of a line. Overdraft account allows you to take a negative position in your account up to the extent of this 10 crore. I'm giving you an example. Up to 10 crores you can basically draw from this account, let's say for example, and you can basically draw from this account on any given day anywhere between 0 to 10 crore. And whatever is the amount that you've drawn in this account, you will be charged interest only for that overdrawn amount. That is what is basically your overdraft account, and this obviously gives a lot of flexibility to your corporates from a working capital standpoint. So that is the context here, right? So when you talk about the next question, which entity basically received approval from the NCLT or the National Company Law Tribunal to acquire Diwan Housing Finance Corporation Limited DHFL for 37,250 crore amidst certain conditions. So which was this entity? So the entity in this case happens to be Piramal Capital and Housing Finance, is basically a subsidiary company of Piramal Enterprises, and that's the answer in this particular case, right? So when I look at the options here, RDG account or the retail direct gilt account and the Piramal Capital and Housing Finance happen to be the answers to these two questions. Now moving on to the next set of questions, SBI, which is the country's largest lender, has basically sanctioned a loan of rupees 3725 crore with a tenure of 20 years for the development of which of these airports? So the airport in this question happens to be Noida International Airport, right, which is now being developed by the Yamuna International Airport Private Limited. That's the company that is developing it, and is also so this Yamuna International Airport Private Limited has your Zurich Airport International AG as the primary or the main shareholder, right? And this entity is basically providing another 2005 crores into the development of the Noida International Airport, right? Now technically NIA will be the second international airport in the National Capital Region of Delhi. Now the context of the government has also accorded in principle approval for setting up 21 greenfield airports in the country, right? Now greenfield means fresh airports altogether. Brownfield means where some work has already happened and you're going to kind of upgrade them or something like that. That's a brownfield project, right? Greenfield means something which is absolutely fresh and new. That's the context, right? Now in that context, 6 of these greenfield airports have basically been operationalized. So you talk about the one mentioned here is Shirdi, then you talk about Durgapur in West Bengal, then you have Pakyong in Sikkim, Kannur in Kerala, Orvakal in Andhra Pradesh, and Kalburgi in Karnataka. So these are additional greenfield airports that have been operationalized. Now that is where the context. Now all of these projects will be happening under the public-private partnership scheme, or basically looking at the regional connectivity scheme. So these are the two areas under which these will happen, and basically there is another context called as UDAN in the context of your regional connectivity scheme, which basically is known as your Ude Desh Ka Aam Nagrik. That's what UDAN basically refers to. Okay, so again, that is under the regional connectivity scheme only, right? So essentially when you talk about it, as of 27th of July 2021, 359 routes have been commenced, out of which 59 are connecting your unserved and underserved airports, including 2 water aerodromes and 5 heliports as well. So quite a lot of work happening, from the perspective of aviation, and it happens to be one of those sectors which was severely impacted by the COVID pandemic as well. Okay, next up we're talking about Google Pay, which is a digital payments platform, is obviously again continuously expanding its network of bank partners, offering the card tokenization on Google Pay app by adding lenders. Now, which of the following banks is currently not a partner? That's the question. So when you look at the overall tokenization phenomenon, especially in the context of Google Pay, it basically has split it into debit cards and credit cards, right? So technically your Google Pay had earlier ruled out tokenization with the Kotak Mahindra Bank, SBI cards, and Axis Bank as well, right? So these were the three entities that were there, and now recently it has basically again tied up with your State Bank of India, IndusInd Bank, Federal Bank, and your HSBC, right? So the context is, when I talk about pure play debit, then essentially your SBI, IndusInd, Federal Bank, all these are tied up with Google Pay from a debit card tokenization standpoint. And then when I talk about credit cards, it is your IndusInd, SBI cards, then your HSBC. So all these are from that perspective. Again, Kotak Mahindra is also from both the cards perspective. So the one entity which is technically not part of that tokenization phenomenon, at least at this point of time, that is IDBI Bank, and that's the answer in this case. So Noida International Airport and IDBI Bank are the answers to the question here. Next up, we're talking about what happened on 21st of June 2021. SBI General Insurance basically signed a bancassurance partnership for selling its non-life, which means any insurance other than life insurance, right, and products through the corporate agency agreement, right? So when I talk about bancassurance, what is bancassurance? It is basically a collaboration or a tie-up between an insurance company, right? And why is it called a bancassurance? Because it is a tie-up with a bank, right, under which the insurance company will basically sell the insurance products, right, to the customers of that particular bank, basically. So using the bank's customer base. So essentially the bank itself will not be selling the insurance product. The insurance company through the bank to the bank's customer base will be selling insurance products, and that is basically known as your bancassurance. And this will benefit the bank as well, because the bank will get some commission from the insurance company as well. So that is the context here. Now the question is, which of these banks did SBI General Insurance tie up with? So the answer in this case happens to be IDFC First, which is basically combined with your SBI General Insurance. Right, so next up we're talking about the fact that SBI introduced a collateral-free offering, which is basically known as a Dash personal loan, to provide financial assistance to its customers to manage the COVID-19 treatment-related expenses, wherein the customers could avail collateral-free personal loan ranging from Rs 25,000 to Rs 5 lakh at an interest rate of 8.5% per annum for a period of 60 months, which basically also includes the 3 months moratorium period as well. So the answer in this case happens to be Kavach, and the answer to both the questions are IDFC First and Kavach. Next thing that I want to discuss is what are the other programs in this option. So Salam Dilse was basically launched by HDFC for doctors. Arogya scheme, or rather Arogya Supreme, was launched by SBI General Insurance, and the Super Options was a derivative related options scheme that was basically launched by Axis. Suraksha technically as a name alone is not something that is related to anything, so that's not the answer in this case. So Kavach is the answer to go for. Right. Next up, we're talking about SBI Cards and Payment Services was in partnership with Dash, and it basically launched co-branded contactless credit cards to offer a rewarding shopping experience to the co-branding partners' premium customers. So when I'm talking about a co-branding partners' premium customers, so obviously I'm talking about a rewarding shopping experience. So it cannot be an online mode directly, right? So that could not be my possible answer. It could be one of these entities, and the answer in this case, especially because you're talking about a recently launched co-branded contactless credit card, the answer in this case happens to be Fab India. Now, which bank has partnered with Hyperverge to obtain its technology called Video KYC solution for onboarding customers online under COVID-19? So you guys should be aware, as you're preparing for the SBI JA exam, that the entity here is SBI only, which is tied up with Hyperverge to kind of do video KYC for onboarding its customers during COVID-19. So those are the answers in this case, Fab India and SBI. So moving on to the next set of questions. Shivrai Technology basically partnered with which leading digital banking platform to launch a B2C farm accounting mobile application, Farmizo Khata? So that's the question here. Now, obviously, these are the options given. So, obviously, since you're preparing for SBI JA, you should be aware that the answer in this case happens to be YONO. Moving on to the next question, we're talking about the electronic trading platform for execution and reporting of trades or transactions in the call, notice and term money market, right? So this is basically the market from where you can actually borrow money from an interbank perspective. So anything less than 2 days or overnight is basically your call money. Anything between 2 days to 14 days is your notice money. Anything beyond 14 days to 1 year is basically term money. So that is what the question is. The answer in this case happens to be fairly straightforward. It is NDS call. NDS refers to your negotiated dealing system. Now, NDS OM is basically a screen-based electronic anonymous order matching system. That is why it's called OM, order matching, for your secondary market trading in your government securities. So that is where your NDS OM comes into the picture. Now, when I talk about CBLO, it basically refers to collateralized borrowing and lending obligation. Now, this is basically again a money market instrument that represents an obligation between a borrower and a lender. That's the context, which is basically concerning the terms and conditions of the loan. So CBLOs basically allows those restricted from using the interbank call money market, the entities who cannot borrow from here, they will be allowed to borrow through the CBLO or CBLO market, so to speak, right? Now, G6 are again issued through auctions conducted by the Reserve Bank of India. The auctions are conducted on the RBI's electronic platform, which is basically called as the eKuber, which is the core banking solution platform or the CBS platform of the Reserve Bank of India. Now, talking about PDO, PDO is obviously a department of RBI, which is Public Debt Office, and NDS is the negotiated dealing system. So this is the entity through which erstwhile all your LAF, repo, reverse repo transactions used to happen, right? So that is basically your PDO, NDS, that is the platform, right? So that's the answer. Now, moving on to the answers here, wherein I wanted to highlight which of these mobile applications belong to which of the banks. So IDBI has Go Mobile Plus, YONO is SBI, BOB has M-Connect Plus, iMobile Pay is basically your ICICI, and PNB has something called as One. So the answers, of course, in this case are YONO and NDS call, but this is more from the perspective of for you to know which are the other mobile applications of the other banks. Right. Moving on to the last set of questions. What amount has been raised by SBI cards and payment services through the issuance of bonds? Now, which category of bonds were these? These were unsecured NCDs or your non-convertible debentures. They were offering a coupon of 5.7% per annum, maturing in May 2024. So the amount that SBI cards has raised through that process is 455 crore. Now, looking at the next question. May 2021, which entity launched India's first lending platform under the cryptocurrency exchange for the investors to invest their coins and earn returns? When I say returns, and it's basically talking about interest, with the exchange currently supporting the Bitcoin, Ether, Tether and DAI tokens, right? So which is the first lending platform under the cryptocurrency exchange? So the answer in this case happens to be ZebPay, which has offered this facility at this point in time, right? So that sums up the entire set of 50 questions. So obviously some of these were fairly straightforward. Some of these could have been solved by logic. Some of these, if you had applied logic, you would have got it wrong. But I hope you enjoyed these set of questions wherein a lot of concepts were also used, a lot of current affairs and financial awareness was also used. And these are the set of 50 questions that I planned to discuss with you today. Right, so that brings us to the end of this particular session, and I hope you really enjoyed the session, not just the 50 questions, but also the options that were given in those 50 questions, which could have led to a lot of other information coming your way as well. So obviously the analysis took a little bit of time, considering the fact that I wanted to explain a lot of things other than just answering the question, because answering the question itself is no fun, right? So unless you're in an exam and you're trying to score, obviously answering the question becomes very important from that standpoint, because there the objective is just for you to score. But the objective of this session today that we've conducted is not just to score, but also to make you understand concepts and understand fundamentals, right? So that was the main objective, and that is the reason why the analysis took so much time. But I hope you really enjoyed this session, and as always, I look forward to seeing you in the next session with some more interesting concepts, some more interesting fundamentals. Until then, this is Ravi signing off. Have a great day and a wonderful week ahead, and I'm sure that you're going to just absolutely phenomenally ace this exam, right? So on that note, this is Ravi signing off. All the best, and I'm sure that you're going to win this battle. See you guys.